Alrighty, chat, let's get started. Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanoja. Just a reminder that although I'm a psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything is for educational or entertainment purposes only. If y'all have a concern or question, please go see a licensed professional. How y'all doing today, chat? Sorry we're running a little bit late. We've got a couple of things that we're juggling today. We don't usually stream on Tuesdays, but we really wanted to stream today, so we've got to move a couple things around and stuff like that, so I apologize for the delay. We've got some really good stuff for y'all today. So we're going to be talking about loneliness. We're going to be talking a little bit about, does depression create negative thoughts, or do negative thoughts create depression? Right? It's kind of tricky, like which comes first? Am I depressed because of all of this negative thinking? Or is all of this negative thinking a consequence of depression? We're also going to be talking a little bit about intelligence and avoidance and how intelligence leads to avoidance, a little bit about gifted kids, but kind of more concretely, right? So for a long time, we've been talking a little bit about, okay, so like if you're a gifted kid, this is how intelligence can lead to avoidance. And so that was really fantastic. Like a lot of people were like, wow, I never realized that. That explains so much about my life. And then they were like, so what do I do about it? Right? So we're going to be talking, and this is what's really actually awesome about doing this work, and what I appreciate so much about y'all is that we're all leveling up together. So the kind of guidance and support that I hope I can offer is like changing over time. Otherwise, like it would get boring, right? So as people in our community are kind of leveling up, as people are starting to realize, oh, I really do avoid things because of like this idea that I'm smart. and it feels pretty paralyzing. Like, what do I do about that? So we're going to be talking a little bit about that. Before we dive in, we're going to take a quick look at TouchGrass. So for those of you who don't know, we're doing a Discord event for the month of July. I guess there's just a few days left, but it's not too late to join. So we're doing a TouchGrass photo challenge, which is designed to help our community to get out and actually start doing stuff. So I'm going to just share this real quick. So y'all can join the Discord, join the TouchGrass channel. You can submit pictures of stuff that you've taken and accumulate points. So this person has taken a long walk. That looks like a very long and warm walk. Cold shower. Walk barefoot on grass. Hug a tree. Touch grass. Touch grass with both hands. Touch sand. Walk barefoot in the sand. Sit on grass and write a journal entry. Water a plant. Meditate in the park. Meditate in the park with a friend. Donate old or unused clothing. Right? So this is, drink fresh juice. Oh, that's so interesting. What kind of juice is that? Run a 5K. Ooh, we're ramping things up. A lot of touching grass, touching sand. Right? So, is that the character for water? Am I remembering that right? Rusty. Yeah, so this is, it's really fantastic. We've gotten thousands and thousands of submissions. I think it's sort of like, it's designed to complement what we do here on stream, which is that we can talk about getting outside of the house and the importance of getting outside of the house. And, Andrew Huberman does a great job of talking about, the health benefits of looking at the horizon and things like that. But at some point, we got to actually leave the house. And the really awesome thing, it's been one of the most successful events on our Discord. A lot of people in our community seem to be super into it. They're going out, they're doing things, they're going to the beach, they're taking hikes, they're meditating, they're getting together with friends, they're playing board games, they're even going on dates. And so, so feel free to join. A couple of other things to keep in mind. Right after stream today, we have an Ask a Coach event on ego and Samskaras. So where we'll sort of explore ego and try to understand what our ego is and how it affects us, how it controls our life. So we'll teach a lot about ego. We're going to be talking a lot about ego today. And if y'all have particular questions about your ahamkara or your ego from sort of a yogic or Vedic perspective as opposed to like a Freudian perspective, we encourage y'all to hop right on Discord after stream. And there's going to be a coach who's going to be talking about this stuff. For those of you that don't know, so a core part of what we teach our coaches and a core part of the paradigm that's at their fingertips is this Eastern psychology perspective. So this isn't really like a psychotherapy perspective. This is a perspective about understanding the human mind. So if we sort of think about the history of psychotherapy, the history of psychotherapy was about fixing things that were problematic, right? Why do you go see a therapist? Because you have a problem. Okay, let's figure out how to fix something that's broken. The yogis had a completely different perspective. They were trying to figure out, how do I refine myself? What is the nature of my mind? What are the basic components of my mind? And so the interesting thing by taking that perspective is that it's more uniform. So when I teach this perspective, I've been really surprised because if you were to ask me to teach a group of 6-year-olds how the mind works and equip them with the tools to understand the mind, that's hard for me to do if I'm using a Western perspective, right? I would probably talk about the conscious and subconscious and things like that. But from teaching the yogic perspective is actually really easy. And even I've literally taught this to groups of 7-year-olds and they really understand it. So we use this model because it is a little bit more applicable and accessible. You don't have to read 1,000 papers. You don't have to go to get a PhD. It's based on your perspective, right? So the experience from the perspective of the experiencer. So if y'all are curious about learning more about your ego, how it holds you back, what your identity is, then feel free to hop onto Discord right after we're done streaming and join the Ask a Coach event. So let's get started. Am I still going to play Stray? I hope so. So here's the challenge of playing games. I want to play games. I love to play games. I've heard really good things about Stray. I'm super excited. And sometimes I feel like there's more important stuff to do. So do I want to play? Will I play? I hope so. But especially with some of the things that we want to talk about today, this is what I struggle with is every day that I wake up to stream, I think, oh, is today going to be the day that I play games? And then I look at what are my options, right? Could I talk to 3 people who call in? Could I address someone's post? And if I really think about it, and if y'all are struggling with gaming as well, I encourage you to basically do the same thing. Or don't do it because it's sometimes frustrating. And I really think about it, and it's like, I could play games for 3 hours, or I could talk to 3 human beings who have questions. And a month from now, a year from now, a decade from now, what is a better use of my time? And truth be told, it's not like, even if I talk to someone for an hour, a decade from now, what difference is it going to make in their life? It's going to be pretty small, right? Like, let's be honest. It's not like a conversation, call and stream with Dr. K is going to be like revolutionary. I'm just a regular human being. They're regular human beings. We're going to try to alter the course of their life a tiny little bit, maybe help them a little bit, maybe offer a little bit of compassion. So it's not like it's transformative. And yet, every hour of every day, you have the option of doing something besides gaming, right? And we're not saying that what you do instead of gaming for an hour is going to change the world or transform your life, but it'll move things in the right direction, right? Whether you sort of lean on atomic habits or you sort of lean on this idea that no snowflake is responsible for the avalanche, the truth is that large change doesn't actually happen at a large scale. The truth of the matter is that large change happens microscopically. If you're struggling and playing too many games, that's not an issue of I've played too many games over the course of the year. That's an issue of I spent this 15 minutes or this 1 hour or this 2 hours playing games. And so will I play Stray? I hope so. But when it comes down to it, the more that I think about it, the more I think that playing Stray is for myself. It's also for y'all too. But, we're on Twitch to do a particular kind of work. And I think we're going to do our best to not let anything get in the way of that. So that's where, maybe I'll log on at some point and, play something. But anyway, great question. I'm glad you asked it. I don't know. I think the Disco Elysium streams were pretty educational. Obanya, I agree. I thought the Disco Elysium streams, I enjoyed them a lot. I thought it was very, very fascinating. Oh, boy. And I'm not so sure that we can expect that from Stray. So I appreciate the fact, actually, one thing that I do want to say, it means a lot to me that y'all are giving me license to play games. That is huge in terms of my mental health and well-being. The fact that when I come on to stream, y'all are valuing what I may enjoy as well, as opposed to all I need to I need to get to 8,000 callers, right? And do this and do more, teach us, meditate. And I think that's actually that's means a lot to me. So thank you very much. Anime watch party when? I don't know, man. I feel like if we're going to do an anime watch party, we got to do it like a good old school con where we get into a room, or what I used to do with my friends with a LAN party, right? I don't know about watch parties, but LAN parties, let's go. All right, let's get started. I hath wasted some time. Okay, so we're going to start by talking a little bit about loneliness. A perspective on female loneliness. Oh, I guess you guys can't see this corner, but that's okay. I wasn't sure if I should post my experience since it's deeply personal, but I've seen similar posts by other women here and decided to just go for it. I'm a 29-year-old woman who is above average looking. I've been hit on a lot in life and get uncomfortable amounts of attention I never asked for. However, I've suffered from social anxiety since I've been a child because of trauma, abuse, and bullying. I was painfully shy until my mid-20s and would hardly speak to anyone. I have no contact with my family because they abused me. I never had a social circle. I've never been in a long-term relationship. I only have 2, quote, friends who also suffer from mental illness. They don't know the extent of my issues, though, and they both live very far away. I spend every day isolated from the rest of the world in my room and hardly get sleep at night because of my insomnia. Out there, I study, and nobody could ever guess I'm living this way. My social anxiety has gotten better to the point that I can fake it, but I am entirely inaccessible as a person. When people talk to me, I listen and reply, but I never talk about my own life. Sometimes I lie when I have to. People often say women can't be lonely, yet I've never been in love and simply can't form deep connections with others. The only relationship I had lasted about 6 months, and the guy had zero interest in knowing me as a person. When I ended things, he openly admitted that he only dated me for my looks. I struggled to act normal and tried being in a relationship like everyone else for 6 painful months, and he had no idea who I even was. I have accepted that I can never be in love despite my painful craving to love someone and truly be loved. My sex drive is high, but I never act on it because I despise the idea of casual sex. Some would say, but you could have sex anytime you want to. Yes, I could. But it wouldn't mean anything. It wouldn't fix my loneliness. It would just make it worse to know that my looks are my only value. I already zoned out of the real world mentally. Outside of studying, I only live in my daydreams and stories I write. My room is filled with merchandise of fictional characters. I talk to them, act like they would be the supportive friends I never had. I've been, quote unquote, in love with a fictional character for almost 15 years. That's the closest feeling I ever felt to loving someone. He's pretty much the reason I'm not killing myself. I even lack the ability to connect with people online. I'm not part of any community or group. I don't have social media or play online games. It's almost like I don't even exist. I'm not posting this to get advice or pity. I just wanted to share my story somewhere for once. I've long accepted that this will be my life forever. What I'm trying to say is, being an attractive woman doesn't magically turn life into easy mode. Women are people too, and you never know what they are hiding just by looking at them. Finding casual sex or even a random relationship with no depth would be easy for me, but it's not worth shit when you want nothing more than a genuine human connection. Update, I didn't expect to receive so many comments, support, or DMs over this post. I never thought so many people could actually relate to it. Thank you for that. I can't reply to everything now because it's a bit overwhelming, but I'm reading everything. So, first thing that I want to say is this person says, I've never been part of a community. And I just want to say, and I hope that, I think they've already figured this out, so I'm late to the party here. If you've never been part of a community, you're welcome here. That's the first thing. Now, I was tempted to say, well, you're a part of this one. Well, that's your choice. It's not for me to say that you are a part of this community or you aren't a part of this community. What I can say is that you're welcome here. I don't know if that kind of makes sense, but it's arrogant for me to assume that this person feels like this is their community, right? If this person doesn't feel like this is their community, like that's them. They're entitled to that. So what I will say is that you're welcome here, and if you'd like to join, I think it's fair to say we'd love to have you. That's what we're going to start with. But I think this post is really, really important because it tackles or addresses a lot of what we sometimes lose sight of. So a lot of people out there think that being pretty translates into, equates having friends, having lovers, having boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever. They think that being physically attractive is a miracle drug, is a panacea for fixing all of the problems in life. And the truth of the matter is that it isn't. And this is what's sometimes so hard for other people to understand, because if we live in a society where being pretty means that your life is easy, what do you say if you are pretty and your life isn't easy? right? How do you get people to understand? Because everyone kind of looks at you and says, like, you're pretty, like, what are you complaining about? You could get laid anytime you want to. Of course you could have a relationship. And there may be people out there that would say, I would love to date you, right? I want to see you as a person. You know, like, I don't get it. Everyone out there is craving something that if you're attractive or you're a woman or whatever, right? If you've got some kind of advantage, everyone out there is craving something and you're craving it too. The challenge is that paradoxically, the advantage that everyone thinks will make your life easy can sometimes actually make your life difficult. And that's something that it's very hard to explain to people who are not in a frame of mind to listen to what your challenges are because you have something that they don't have. Right? I don't know if that sentence was too complex, so I'll try to say it again. But like, sometimes, so let's try to understand a little bit, right? So I'm going to generalize here, which is the first mistake, but like what it's like to be like an attractive human being, especially a woman. This isn't just about women, by the way. So when you do enter into a relationship, sometimes what people will do if you're attractive is they'll just see the physical attractiveness, right? That's what they're interested in. And this person has even had an experience where someone dated them for 6 months because of the way that they looked. And so it's kind of weird, and we may sort of say that, okay, physical attractiveness makes it easy for you to get into relationships, and that may be true, but my point is that that's not sufficient to deal with the crushing loneliness that you feel. And in fact, sometimes it can even reinforce it. Because why is this person in a relationship? It's not because of me. It's because of the way that I look. Right? I'm one accident away of having no value. Because if I get into a car accident or if I trip and fall and I get a scar on my face or I break my nose or something like that, then I have no value at all. So the really challenging thing sometimes about people who are attractive is that their value starts to become based on their attraction. Because society as a whole thinks, okay, this has so many advantages, like this is your worth. And that's actually like their experience. And so I want y'all to think about this a little bit. Because if you're an attractive woman and you get a job, what do people attribute your success to? Or you being hired to? If you get promoted, what do they attribute your success to? Now, this is kind of tricky, right? Because most people will actually attribute it to your value as a person, to your work ethic. Let's be fair. The challenge is that some people don't, right? Some people will say like, oh, she just got the job because she's hot, or she got promoted because she's sleeping with the boss. And they kind of make these kind of comments and they make these kind of jokes. We're not saying that the majority of people are like this. So then why do we even bring it up? If the majority of people aren't like this, like, why does it matter, right? Like if like 98 to 95% of people don't say things like this, what difference does it make? Why are we focusing on the 2%? So let me ask y'all a question. How many people does it take to ruin your day? How many people does it take to ruin your life? How many people does it take to turn an achievement into ash? This is why we talk about it. And this is what's so hard about being in a situation like this. If you're lonely and you're attractive, and we're going to talk more about that, right? And you have one relationship where the person even says, like, they don't treat you like a person, right? Like they're like really interested in your looks, and you kind of like, you try to make it work, right? Because you're like, okay, I'm lonely. What's the antidote? Like, I need to be in a relationship. Okay, let's like find someone. Okay, this person's nice. They're being really nice to me. They're getting me flowers. We're going on dates and whatnot. We're dating for 6 months. But like, the more you're in that relationship, you start to feel like there's not a connection here. And then you break up with them because you torture yourself for months in this relationship, trying to find a connection with another human being. And then when you end the relationship because you're not getting a connection, they're even like, yeah, by the way, I wasn't really interested in you as a person. And that hurts. That sinks in deep. It confirms everything that you fear. So the challenge here is that sometimes we have advantages, and there's data, for example, that shows that attractive people get particular advantages in life. We're not disputing that. The key thing is that somewhere along the way, we started to take the advantages that, let's say, attractive people face, the advantages that attractive people receive, that women receive, that tall men receive. You can take whatever you want. Like, you can take whatever advantage. There are all kinds of advantages. Having hair, right? That's an advantage. People treat you differently. And somewhere along the way, we started gatekeeping suffering if someone has an advantage. And we started to invalidate people's experiences around this. We started to say that, by the way, if you're attractive, you're not allowed to be lonely. You're not allowed to be socially anxious, because everyone would want to be friends with an attractive person, right? Because there's actually data that shows that. That maybe, I actually don't know that. I haven't looked at that, but I'm sure that there's papers out there that show that attractive people have more friendships than unattractive people, right? It's not a surprising finding. But here's the thing to understand, is that each and every one of us is an individual human being, and that no one feature of us determines who we are as a person. And in fact, the reason that this makes us so lonely is because sometimes if we're attractive, it's like that one feature is the only thing that other people see. And that's not just about attractiveness, right? This is something that's generalizable as well, where you may be someone whose entire life, or what everyone looks at when they see you, is determined by one feature. I'm the oldest son of a business mogul. Therefore, the weight of the world's expectations are on my shoulders. I'm an attractive woman. Therefore, everything for me is supposed to be easy. And this is what's so devastating about it, is when things are supposed to be easy for you, how does that make you feel when they're hard? Because everyone's telling you, hey, life is supposed to be easy. You got the golden ticket. You're playing life on easy mode. It's devastating. Because failing at life is one thing, but failing at life on easy mode destroys who you are, destroys your capacity for self-love. So what do we do about this? So the first thing to understand is that sometimes people who are in this cycle, and it sounds like this person in a sense is not in this cycle, but I still want to kind of talk about it. Sometimes when we have one feature which we think should fix loneliness, okay? Or the world tells us, invalidates us if we say we're lonely. We can use that feature as a crutch to connect with other people. So if you're an attractive woman and you feel lonely, sometimes what you'll fall into is casual sexual relationships. And you're looking for more, but sometimes that feeling of loneliness is so heavy and so crippling that you'll use anything you can to make it go away for a little while. Right? Because the truth of the matter is that that feeling of loneliness has a neurochemical component. So after having sex with someone and after like laying with them, like you'll get this release of oxytocin. And this is, once again, an oversimplification, but oxytocin is one of the hormones that we use to bond. So it's responsible for like maternal infant bonding. It's also responsible for like bonding in romantic relationships. It's part of the reason why friends with benefits can sometimes be hard, or specifically cuddling after engaging in sexual relations with a friend with benefits will start to create catching feelings. It's part of the reason that we catch feelings. And so if you're lonely and you're craving human connection, it turns out that sex can give you a piece of that. As an interesting aside, some people have even found research, or some people have done research on why people with schizophrenia have difficulty forming emotional connections with other people. And one of the theories they've traced it back to is actually oxytocin deficiencies. And so some people were pretty pioneering, and they thought, okay, what if we artificially give people oxytocin nasal spray? Because that's the delivery thing that they did. So they did clinical trials on oxytocin nasal spray for people with schizophrenia to see if they could help them form like relationships and emotional bonds. Turns out that the data wasn't really good and it didn't seem to be very effective. It was a really interesting kind of side note. So sometimes when we're really lonely, we'll use anything that we can to get our needs met, right? You want to crave some kind of, you're craving that connection so much, you'll even engage in sex. And it sounds like this person has sort of tried the casual sex route and it sort of didn't work for them, which I think is like a step in the right direction. So be a little bit careful about what you use to get your needs met. Because if you do use sex to connect with another person, because it does sort of like engage oxytocin for them, it engages oxytocin for you, there's some amount of bonding. Freudian slip of the year. There's some amount of bonding, but that bonding too is somewhat artificial. That connection that you're forming with them is based on them not knowing who you are. And then something really devastating can happen. Because over time, you can start to learn that the only way for me to get this is through sex. Because in your life, you're lonely until you have sex with someone. And then for a few moments, you're connected. And then over time, if that's the only way you can connect to people, what does that do to your sense of identity? It cripples it. Because now the only thing that I'm worth, the only worth that I bring as a person is through my body. That's the only way I can connect with people. And so interestingly enough, what we tend to see, and this is not just about attractive women who are lonely, but this is also about people who engage in unhealthy sexual relationships and use sex as a coping mechanism and things like that. We sort of create this vicious cycle where I'm getting my needs met through some kind of unhealthy relationship, and the unhealthy relationship actually reinforces the negative parts of myself that make it hard for me to connect. Because if I'm not worth any more than my body, then why would anyone ever want to connect with me? I can't risk showing people what I really am because what I am is ugly, but what I look like is attractive. And so you're terrified to actually engage with people, even though you crave it. So the first thing to do is, if you're in that cycle, understand that cycle. Now, the second thing that I want to comment on is I imagine that there are some people who are listening to this who may be reacting strongly to it. So here are a couple of the reactions that I'm envisioning, okay? Some people may say, I'm lonely and unattractive, but I'd take sex plus loneliness over loneliness plus no sex any day of the week, right? Even having sex is like one step up. And there are some people out there who are craving a sexual relationship. And the thought of I can get laid anytime that I want to sounds like the holy grail to them. And they're like, what is this person complaining about? This sounds amazing. There may be other people who are sort of reacting to this as well, which is like, sort of like, once again, what is this person complaining about? There's so many advantages to being an attractive woman in the world. I don't get it. If you're listening to this and you're reacting that way, I want you to notice what you are doing to the other person with your reaction. This person is telling you that they're suffering. They have something that, granted, you don't have. And there may be advantages to that. And you can want that thing. But you're just assuming that their experience is incorrect. And you're actually depriving them of the capacity to suffer and connect with other people, because what you're doing is judging them, right? You're just sort of like, you're not like actually like acknowledging who they are as a person and treating them with compassion. You're actually saying like, why are you complaining? Now, here's the key thing to understand if you're having that reaction, which is okay. When you tried to demonstrate your suffering and your humanness to other people, how did they react to you? When you said, I'm lonely, when you said, it's impossible for me to find a date. When you said, I'm never going to get laid, what did the world say to you? Lol, what? Just work on yourself. Just untake the black pill. It's all in your head. You can fix it. The world did to you exactly what you're doing to this person. And when the world does that, when the world invalidates us, sometimes what we do is we lean into a community that says, yes, 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 your suffering is justified, your suffering is real. Right? And then we separate. You know, I'm not saying that there aren't some people who have some advantages in life, but my overwhelming experience has been that advantages are advantages, make no mistake. So I still remember, for example, being a medical student and having female colleagues and walking into a patient's room, and the patient assumes that I'm a doctor when I'm just a medical student, and they assume that later on when I'm actually a doctor and I have resident colleagues, assuming that their doctor is actually a nurse. So I got treated like a doctor when I wasn't one, because I'm a man, an Indian. And I had female colleagues who got treated as nurses when they were doctors. So we're not saying that these things don't exist. My point is that those things don't automatically translate to happiness. And I've seen this as a psychiatrist, working with people who are struggling because they're homeless and working with people who are struggling because they're partners at investment banks. And this is something that, by the way, it's not just me, right? There's also Buddha who sort of said this. And there's some research that sort of contradicts it, which we have to acknowledge, right? So we know that, for example, a certain amount of financial security does correlate with happiness. So we're not saying that there isn't an influence. But what I want you to really focus on is how you treat this person. Because this is really important. When someone posts and we talk about it, we talk about what they should do differently. We give them all of the responsibility. Right? Oh, I'm stuck. What should I do? How can I connect with people? And we're going to talk a little bit more about what this person can do. But this is something that's really important to understand. If someone is struggling out there, it's not necessarily entirely their fault. All of us are products of our environment. We're products of the judgments that people face, that people give us. Their lives are also determined by the judgments we make. And so if you're listening to this post and it's making you feel resentful because I don't understand why this person is complaining, I have it so much harder. I'm not saying you don't have it harder. What I'm saying is that comparing who has it harder doesn't actually help. I did 3 months of work on a trauma unit, and then also was on call and stuff for years on the same trauma unit. Got called a lot. And one of the things that we found is that people would instinctively compare their trauma. Oh, you were emotionally abused? I was physically abused. You were physically abused? I was sexually abused. And it doesn't help. Right? Why do people do that? It's because they themselves, when you shared your story of suffering, people invalidated you. They said, you don't deserve to suffer. Like, what are you complaining about? You're a male incel. There's male privilege. Right? And then the incels are saying, oh, there's like women privilege. They can get laid whenever they want to. Like, my point is, like, it's not about the statistics. It's about how we treat each other as human beings. When someone else says they suffer, how do you respond to that? When you shared your suffering, how did someone else respond to you? And that's what I really commend about this person, because this person is saying, this is my experience. And what I'm really proud of is that this is a community where we have heard this person. And we've said, we hear you. It sounds tough. And by the way, this is me. I didn't know that attractive women could feel this way. Right? Which is awesome. That's where AOE healing comes from. So I said it at the beginning. I'll say it again. You're welcome here. Now, last thing to talk about. So one thing is we talked about the cycle, right? Next thing to talk about is what do you do if you're kind of in this situation? So generally speaking, when I encounter situations like this, we do see this cycle of being judged because of the way that you look. Your identity starts to form, kind of like it almost gets split off, where this is like the real me and this is the way that the world treats me. And the more that I get judged about the way that I look, the more isolated I feel and the less good of a person I kind of become in my own head. I don't know if that sort of makes sense. But so for example, like let's say I get promoted and people make comments, and how many comments does it take to ruin your day? Right? So like if you have a birthday party and 10 people bring gifts and one of them is a pile of feces, that's going to ruin your day, even if the other 9 gifts were really great. If 10 people there, if 9 people are like, hey, you're a really awesome person, we really love having you in our life, and one person is like, here's a pile of feces, you're a waste of space, I hope you cease to exist. Right? It doesn't, like that's the fundamental problem with the world, which is that it's so much easier to hurt than it is to help. And so the challenge here is that as we develop and as we start getting treated a particular way because of our identity, we start to realize, oh, like here's my worth as a human being. Here's all the successes and failures I have. But if I'm pretty and more people attribute it to my attractiveness, then my actual sense of self kind of like falls and goes in the other direction. Does that kind of make sense? Because the more that people start to talk about my achievements being due to my attractiveness or due to my wealth or due to my advantages, the more I start to feel bad about myself. And the more I start to feel bad about myself, the more that I compensate in different kinds of ways. Like I develop a strong ego or narcissistic defense mechanisms. And y'all can even see that like in the mass media with public figures, right? There are some people out there who, when they accomplish things, no one says, hey, good job, that's actually pretty impressive. What everyone says is, oh, you just got there because you were born with advantages. And then we'll also potentially even see the egotistical responses. And then it just becomes a cycle. Right? Because the thought of compassion towards that person is mind-blowing. Like, what? So what do you do if you're kind of in this situation where you've been taught or you've learned this lesson that your worth is based on your attractiveness? So I know it's going to sound kind of hard, but what you should do is find out who you are. So who you are is not determined by how you're treated. That's why we call one how you're treated, right? How people relate to you. It's a treatment. It's not who you are. The problem is that we tend to conflate the two. And for people who are more egotistical, whose ahamkaras are stronger, what we tend to find is that who they are is how they are treated. So in psychiatry, this is like when we look at narcissism. So if people treat me with respect, I feel like I'm on top of the world. But if people treat me with disrespect, I'm a horrible human being. And so how do I protect myself in that situation? I have to force people to treat me with respect, because I can't tolerate when they don't. Because if they don't treat me with respect, then my sense of identity is determined by how I'm treated. And you'll see this, which is why like people always have to be the center of attention. They can't tolerate criticism, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to find out who you are. How do you do that? So I recognize that you're lonely. I think there are a couple of different ways to find out who you are. And we're going to kind of speed run this, right? This is like the topic of potentially a whole guide. But a couple things. The first is to spend time with yourself. And you may say, but I'm lonely, I do that all day. There's a subtle difference. There's a difference between being at home and wanting to be with someone else and spending time with yourself. So like, before stream today, I went for a walk. And I went for a walk with myself. And I just spent time letting my thoughts happen, thinking through stuff. I recognized that I need some time with myself. We need to like work through a couple things, figure out what to do, figure out what we're going to do today, how we're going to handle an extra stream this week, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes, I love this, I'll go eat on my own at a restaurant when I get a chance to. And people may look at you and think like, oh my God, like this person is so pathetic, they're eating alone. And it's like, they can think that if they want to. I just really want to enjoy my food my way. I don't have to, sometimes like, usually I go out to eat with my kids, for example, right? But like going out to eat with your kids is like, I don't really have time to enjoy my food because I have to worry about feeding them, ordering for them. They're flopping around. They want to watch a screen, things like, it's chaos. I'm wolfing down my food in between, like, trying to feed them bites and make sure they're not like, the elbow isn't going to hit. If you guys have young kids, you'll know this. The elbow isn't going to knock their cup of water over. So spend time with yourself. Go for a hike. I think nature is fantastic that way. So if we really look at it, like if ego ties to how other people perceive us, one way that we can get away from that whole complex is nature. Because nature doesn't care. Like if you go for a hike and you go alone versus go with someone else, like let me give you a couple scenarios. Let's say that I'm going for a 4-hour hike. 2 hours in, I start to feel tired. And I'm like, maybe I should turn back. And then if you're with someone, you choose not to turn back. Why don't you turn back? Because you don't want to be perceived as weak. And so even if you accomplish your goal, do you feel pride in it? No. I hiked for the avoidance of weakness. It actually enhances the ego and makes you more insecure. If you go by yourself, you're on the first 2 hours of the hike. And I recognize it's a 4-hour hike, and we said turn around, so it's 4 hours either way, but whatever. It's a 4-hour trail, 8-hour hike, back and forth. You can turn back anytime you want to. No one's going to judge you but you. If you achieved it, you achieved it. If you didn't achieve it, you didn't achieve it. No one's going to clap. No one's going to say you're weak. No one's going to give you any reaction except for yourself. You're not going to post about it on Instagram. Maybe you will, but you shouldn't. It's really important for you to test yourself. If you want to find out who you are, you have to test yourself. And whether you succeed or you fail, you're the only one that knows. And so if you decide to push through and you say, you know what, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep going. No matter what. And you get to the top of the mountain, no one's there. You don't even feel elated. You feel like, thank God it's over. Now I have to go back down. No one's clapping for you. No one's saying, oh, you're such an amazing human being. Look, triumph of the human spirit, like you walked for 4 hours at a mild incline, like great job. That's what you're going to be telling yourself. This is no achievement. Because that's the toxic part of you. That's the part of you that's created when you can't connect with another human being. And you do that enough times and you'll start to realize, you know what? That actually isn't true. I did do it, and I can be proud of this. I gotta start somewhere. Even if I can't be proud of it. If you can't be proud of it, no big deal. You did it. You put your mind to it, and you did it. So find out who you are. And that happens first and foremost with yourself. Second thing, fourth thing, I don't know, lost track of numbering, is I think that reach out to someone else in an authentic way, which is kind of what this person did. Right? So no one is going to appreciate you for who you are unless you actually show them. And this is where things get really tricky. Because if you really show them who you are, you open the door to rejection. And especially if you're like in this case, an attractive woman who's lonely, that's going to it's so devastating, right? Because if I pretend to be okay and I'm attractive, everyone thinks my life is great. But then if I turn to them and I say, hey, by the way, I'm actually really struggling, really lonely, and I have difficulty connecting with other human beings. What's so terrifying about that is if they turn to you and say, what on earth are you talking about? You're so attractive, you shouldn't have problems. And so in that moment, you're opening the door for them to reject you. The challenge of being connected with another human being is in order to be accepted by someone, the door must be open for them to reject you as well. And we're so afraid of that rejection that we can never risk it. And therefore, we can never give someone the chance to accept us. And so we stay stuck. I think the good news is that a lot of that is in our head, right? I'm not saying that mean people don't exist out there, right? So this person had an experience with a boyfriend who was basically very shallow, but people in our community exist too, where this person shared this and there were people who were there willing to listen and be compassionate and stuff like that. And like I've said it 1,000 times, I'm going to say it 1,000 more times. Healthy Gamer is more than Dr. K. Who helped this person connect with other human beings? It wasn't Dr. K. The work has been done. It's y'all. Right? This person is overwhelmed by the responses and support, and they don't have time to reply to all of the people who are responding. That's y'all. That ain't me. So be a little bit careful about who you open up to by all means. But you've got to give people a chance to reject you if you want to be accepted. So a couple of things just to kind of recap. So someone posted about being an attractive woman who's lonely. And for a slice of humanity, a slice of the internet, that does not compute. Because being attractive is the antidote to loneliness, right? If you're attractive, especially a woman, then you should be able to make friends very easily. You can get laid anytime you want to. Oh my God. Sounds so amazing. The truth of the matter is that any advantage is never a substitute for like happiness and will protect you 100% from suffering. Do advantages give us advantages? Yeah. Do they help out some? Absolutely. Are some of them pretty big? Absolutely. And yet, they're not a substitute for connection, right? Attractiveness is not a substitute for connection. And in fact, sometimes this is what people who really struggle is that sometimes attractive people are more lonely. And when I say more, I'm creating a comparison. So let's step away from that statement, actually. Are incredibly lonely. Let's use that. So why are they incredibly lonely? Because anytime someone interacts with them, they're not interacting with a person, they're interacting with the shell of a person. They're not interacting with you, they're interacting with your appearance. And the more that people interact with your appearance and all they see is the appearance instead of the person, the more lonely the person becomes. The real challenge here is that if you share that with people, they're going to be upset. Because there are people out there who are hurt and lonely themselves and don't have that advantage. And so they're going to turn to you and say, how dare you complain? Because I'm in the same situation, except I'm not even attractive. And in that moment, they invalidate your experience. Why do they do that? Because that is what was done to them. Because when they reached out for help, when they said, I'm struggling, I can't even have sex. I've never had sex and I'm going to die a virgin. And men can say this, women can say this, non-binary people can say this. Maybe asexual people say this. I don't really know. Right? Because sometimes they're not interested in it, which is totally fine. Anyone can say this. But when people said this, remember, once again, the majority of people may say, wow, that must be hard for you. But all it takes is a couple of people to say, wow, it's all in your head. If you just did this, you could engage in a sexual relationship. So it can actually be really invalid. It can be hard, right? Because now you've tried to open the door and you've tried to connect with another person. What has someone else done? Slammed it in your face. So what do you do about this? The first is be a little bit careful about what the dirty tricks you'll use to satisfy your loneliness. And I don't just mean sexual, I mean generalizing it for a reason, right? So there are certain things that we'll do to get people to help us feel less lonely, but in an inauthentic way, sneaky way. Sometimes we'll offer sex. Sometimes we'll offer money, right? Oh, I'll pay for all my friends. I'll pay so they come. Right? I'm going to have a birthday party and I'm going to pay for all the food. I'm going to take everyone out to dinner. That way people will show up. We'll use some of our advantages to make us feel less lonely. But in those moments, what we're actually doing is reinforcing our loneliness. Because it's not an authentic connection. We're buying it, paying a particular price. So you've got to be super careful about that cycle, especially because sometimes as you become lonely, there's only one thing that works, right? Which is at times, for women or men, like offering your physical form, offering your body, or offering money. And then that's the only way that we know to find connection. But the more that we connect with people that way, it like reinforces the problem because they're not connecting with me. They're not showing up at my birthday party because they like me. They're showing up at my birthday party for the free food. But that's the only way that I can get them to come, and I don't want to be alone on my birthday because that hurts too much. So be aware of that cycle. And the next thing is get in touch with yourself. Find out who you are. You're saying that you have trouble connecting with other people. Sometimes the hardest reason to connect with other people is because we're not sure who we are. We don't know what there is to connect to. We don't know, am I good on the inside or am I bad on the inside? Am I someone who's worth being friends with one day? And if you don't have that confidence in yourself, it's so hard to connect with people because there's a lot of uncertainty. What if I'm not actually worth connecting with? So how do you find that? You spend time with yourself. You start to realize, and this is what it looks like after, healthy work, that I am who I am. Not everyone is going to like it. And that's okay. My value as a human being is not determined by getting this particular person to like me and this particular person to hang out with me. But oftentimes when we struggle with our own identity, that's what it turns into. And suddenly this person's opinion means the world to us. And if this person agrees to go on a date with me, it means I'm a good human being. And if this person doesn't agree to go on a date with me, it means I'm a bad human being. The next thing that you've got to do to connect is open the door for rejection. Because in order for someone to truly accept you, which is what connectedness feels like, right? To really connect with someone is to have someone see you and say, hey, I recognize you're flawed. Hey, I recognize you're a complex human being, and I like you anyway. Because when you're attractive, I like you despite who you are. I appreciate the attractiveness outweighs the bad stuff. And if we really want to connect with people, that needs to change. You can't have people accepting you because you're attractive despite the bad stuff. You need actually people to accept you kind of no matter what, right? You want people to accept you in spite of your flaws and not for any other particular reason. For them to say, it's okay that you have your flaws, that your flaws are over here, your advantages over here. It's not because one outweighs the other. It's because both of them are you and I accept you whole package. It's not about a balancing or like hitting a certain threshold. The last thing to consider in terms of being seen is you can absolutely work with a therapist, especially if you've got problems with like social anxiety or things like that. I'd recommend a clinical evaluation if you haven't gotten one to see if really therapy is appropriate for you. And if it isn't appropriate for you, or I mean, it can still be appropriate even if you're not clinically ill, and you find a good therapist, that can be very, very helpful. But part of what we tend to see actually in coaching is that women who are in this situation do really, really well in coaching. People have trouble connecting, and we have kind of data behind that. So not published or anything like that, but we do a lot of internal data to try to figure out, okay, who can we actually help? And it turns out that we have good outcomes around women who struggle with discovering who they are and facing judgment from the world. Even in career coaching, we sort of see that a fair amount, where like women are struggling to figure out like, okay, how do I represent myself well in the workplace? How do I deal with toxicity in the workplace? Things like that. Questions? This is a great question. Blenise is asking, when people come to us and share experiences like that on the internet or IRL, how do we know when it's just venting and when they need actual advice? It's a great question, and my answer is going to be a little bit tongue-in-cheek. So oftentimes, they will tell you, I'm not posting this for advice or pity. And if they don't tell you, you can ask. Right? I know it sounds like a simple answer, but like that's honestly like, I mean, even when people come into my office, I'll just ask, like, ask them, you're sharing all this stuff with me. What do you, does it feel good to get it off of your chest? And is that really what you're looking for? Or, do you want to like do a little bit more back and forth? Are you looking for guidance? Or are you looking for support? Those are the two words that I'll use. Because venting and advice have certain connotations to them. So you can just ask them. Yeah, Triple Stan is saying, are you looking for feedback or do you just want to vent? Oftentimes, I find that it's a safe bet to assume it's just venting. And if they want advice, they will ask for it. So I tend to default to support as opposed to guidance. Okay. A question, what if there are conditions or boundaries that impact the connection? For example, someone says they aren't ready for love, but they want to be treated as though they are loved. So Abby Des, that's a great question. So that's where the tricky thing there is that there's usually like, I'm assuming that there's another person in that relationship, right? So I want to be treated as though they're loved but aren't ready for love. That can put the other person in a very, very awkward situation because you're asking them to like, that's confusing. How do you treat someone with love who's not ready for love? Or like, what does that mean to them? So I think the first thing to understand is that just because someone wants something, if they're not ready for it, probably means that they need to do some work, right? Because they have, that sounds to me like that needs to be explored more or resolved in some way. And if you're trying to have a relationship with that person, I'm not even saying romantic, it can be platonic, it can be parental, whatever. That can be really confusing for you. So I would clarify what that means, right? So treat it as though they are loved. Like, what does that mean? And, what does it mean to not be ready for love? Like, help me understand like what that means. And if you're the person who feels that way, where you feel like I want to be treated with love, but I'm not ready for love, you need to ask yourself, what does that mean? What makes it so that you aren't ready for love? What makes it so that you want to be treated with love? Like, what is that, if you get treated that way, what is that satisfying? What hunger does that fill? So I think it's a great starting point, but requires further exploration. Okay. Should we move on? A lot of good questions, but we've got a couple other things that we want to cover, and I think some of this stuff is actually related. I really appreciate everyone who's doing back and forth in chat. I see a lot of people adding each other, which I think is healthy. Okay. Great questions. Okay. We've got a choice. Do we have mods in chat? Okay, yes, Dr. K, my intelligence leads to avoidance, but what do I do about this now? And does depression cause pessimistic thoughts, or pessimistic thoughts cause depression? Which one? Thanks, Pengu, for making me feel included. I appreciate it. I know, which one do we want to do first? Let's see. It's close. Ooh, depression. Ooh, it's close, chat. Okay, looks like intelligence leads to avoidance is pulling ahead, so we'll do that one first. Yeah, so that's how you know that we've picked good topics. 60-40, okay. Let's dive in. Thank you very much for voting. Appreciate it. Sometimes I'm indecisive and I don't know what to pick and I have to lean on y'all, so thank y'all very much. All right, give me a second. Okay. Thanks for the gifted subs, Zerone. I know you've gifted a lot of subs to us. Thank you very much. All right, so let's take a look at this. All right. So yes, Dr. K, my intelligence leads to avoidance, but what do I do about this now? So I'm gifted. My IQ was tested a few years ago by a professional, so real gifted, okay, y'all? I'm so scared of opening my assignments because I don't understand everything right away. My friends waste their lives partying and having fun / swimming. I waste my life avoiding my dream life and good grades with YouTube, wanting to be productive, and having an unbearable high stress level throughout the day and night because I'm not productive. I'd rather waste my day like other people my age are, i.e. partying, than wanting to do what gives me purpose, work, study, while burning myself out instead of doing anything. But if I'm hearing this properly, they don't actually party a lot, right? I watch YouTube to avoid the reality that I am dumb, but it's really just an example. I'm not addicted to YouTube. The problem is that I am terrified of doing a task that I cannot do. I'm terrified of having an academic question that I'm unable to answer. I don't even think this is because I am officially intelligent. I think I am really, really dumb for putting myself into this position. Like I failed the IQ I was born with, or my brain failed so miserably that even my IQ cannot save me from my misery. What do I do now? I watched many Dr. K's videos and they are helpful, but there's no solution, I guess. Understanding the problem does not make it go away at this moment. The only thing that has helped me once was keeping on track and on top of my studies, e.g. starting with my homework right away after they were published, or having some control, someone control me, like a social control or responsibility in a group setting. Sometimes having deadlines helps, but now my threshold that makes me go into panic and productiveness mood is so high that it has led me missing deadlines simply because they don't pressure me as much as I'm used to, and I'm better at avoiding them now than ever. Thanks for sharing that. So this person comes up with a good point. We talk about how intelligence leads to avoidance, but we don't really tell you how to fix it. Right? We talk about these problems that gifted kids face, and we'll offer some direction, but you know, there's no solution in the moment. There's nothing that makes it go away like right this second. And watching this 8-minute video on intelligence to avoidance on YouTube has not fixed my problem. And it's a reasonable complaint. I realize I'm saying that kind of sarcastically because I'm sort of framing that you can't fix a problem with a YouTube video, but it's a fair complaint. Right? So let's try to understand this person's perspective. Okay, I've seen this now. That's huge. I recognize now that my intelligence leads to avoidance, and we'll share that. We'll do a quick recap in a second. But how do I fix it? How do I make it go away? How do I start being productive? Right? Because we sort of talk about this principle that good diagnosis precedes good treatment, which is a principle in medicine. It's a principle in plumbing. Right? If you've got a clogged toilet, you got to know why it's clogged. Clogged dishwasher, you got to know why it's clogged before you can fix it. And now I've understood that this is my problem. This really seems to resonate with me, but what do I do about it? So let's dive into this. This person has an excellent point. What do you do about it? Okay. Oh. If your IQ leads to avoidance, what do? Okay. It's a good question. So let's start by understanding a little bit about intelligence and avoidance. So we're going to do a quick run, okay, through this. So how does intelligence lead to avoidance? So here's me. I'm a gifted kid. I have high IQ. So then what happens is here are my parents. And they tell me, oh, you are so smart. And that makes me feel good about myself. It starts to form an identity. I am smart. This identity is reinforced through professional IQ testing in this case. So this is who I am. I'm smart. So what does it mean to be smart? Smart equals easy. Because when we're growing up, there are two kinds of kids. There's the smart kids and the stupid kids. Who are the smart kids? They're the ones that understand it right away. This is really beautiful. I'm so scared of opening my assignments because I don't understand everything right away, right? Because that's what a smart kid is. Smart kid, second grade, gets taught arithmetic, picks it up right away. The stupid kid takes time to learn. So what does that mean for this person? As I grow older, right? So as I get bigger and bigger, school is easy. Easy over here, starts to get tricky over here, and eventually starts to get hard, no matter how smart you are. Or maybe you should be smarter. So what tends to happen is that as we grow older, we'll start to do other things. And then there's some things that are easy for us and some things that are hard for us. But if we do the hard things, we start to feel stupid. If I actually have to study to accomplish something, that sounds, So I don't do this. Because if I feel stupid, this means I'm not smart. And then what happens is this identity kind of, I'm not a smart kid anymore. So what we do is we pick the easy thing. And so what happens is we've got easy and hard. We don't go down this path. We go down this path. And then we're going to have hard and easy. And we're not going to go down this path. And we're going to go down this path. Right? So as we grow older, we avoid things. And then eventually, our life becomes narrower and narrower and narrower. Versus if we had actually been able to do hard stuff, if we didn't avoid so much, now this is the whole of our life. And we get better at this stuff, right? Because we practice, and then this eventually becomes easy. And then we become competent. I learn how to play the piano, and now that's impressive. And so my identity expands to include all of these things. But as we pick the easier and easier things, we become less and less capable. Because all we're doing is playing on easy mode. Because we never like do anything to challenge ourselves, so we never grow. And so this cycle gets worse and worse and worse. The more you choose the easy path in life, the more deconditioned you become. As you become deconditioned, it becomes harder and harder to do things. The harder and harder things become, you start to feel like this. The reality that I am dumb. I'm really, really dumb. And so what you end up with is a ton of avoidance. You can't do anything challenging, nothing that threatens your identity. Now, let's understand this a little bit more carefully. So when I say nothing threatens your identity, what do I mean by that? So over time, if intelligence leads to avoidance, you have this thought down here. I am really dumb. And then you've got this barrier where you keep this thought trapped. And above this is I am smart. And so you've got to be careful, because if there's a particular experience, because this is the air that you put on for other people, right? This is what you show the rest of the world, because you never do anything hard, so you never look stupid. You're always doing things that are easy for you. So if there's a particular experience that makes you look smart, that's totally fine. But if there's an experience over here that is going to make you look dumb, you don't do it. So over time, what happens is our life becomes a shell of pretending to be smart when we really feel stupid. Okay? Now, the real challenge here is that so like this is like, do y'all see how this is sort of like an ego identity up here and a real insecurity down here? Now we get to the first problem, which is how do we actually solve this insecurity? What we do is we do experiences that make me feel dumb, but then over time, I succeed. Right? That's how we become confident. Oh, I'm so insecure that no one will talk to me at a party. If I avoid the party, what's going to happen to the insecurity? It's going to stay there. If I go to the party and people talk to me anyway, and I have a good time, then like I can start to like challenge that insecurity. So the really devastating thing, what's so paralyzing about being in this situation, is the very things that you need to do to fix it are the very things that you avoid at all costs. It's not even like 50-50. It's like there's one solution to this, and that's the solution that you're avoiding. Actually, your solution so far has been to avoid the real solution. Because even if we go back over here, like how do you stop choosing the easy path? You pick the hard path over here, and then that actually is okay, and then you stop fearing the hard path. Right? But in order to preserve your identity of intelligence, you're never going to do this. Does that make sense? It's kind of bizarre because your solution to life, which is avoidance, is actually what's creating the problem. And the solution that you need is the exact opposite of what has gotten you here, which is exactly why this is so perpetual, right? We sort of see this cycle where it starts small and then it grows over time and gets worse. So this is the first thing to understand. Okay? So, what do you do about it? You want answers? Let's start with this. EQ. So another thing to understand about the mind is that it's an efficient organ. If our intellect is really, really good, we're going to lean on our intellect to overcome challenges, right? So like, for example, if I have to compete with someone in, let's say, basketball, and I'm physically not very fast, strong, or accurate, I may develop a strategy that will compensate for my physical weaknesses. Right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to lean into my intelligence, and I'm going to come up with an elegant solution that compensates for my weaknesses. So in that kind of situation, what I'm going to do, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on the basketball court, practicing. I'm not going to physically train myself, condition myself, things like that. I'm going to try to figure out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the coach and I'm going to say, okay, so, let's figure out how we're going to determine teams. I have a proposal for who's going to be on my team and who's going to be on the other team. And then I'm going to convince everyone of this proposal. And then what I'm going to do is win the game anyway because my proposal is so clever that I'm going to get all the stacked players on my team. Or something like that. So what happens with intelligent kids is that they actually don't level up their other skills because intelligence is so effective. It's the same reason why we don't learn to use our non-dominant hand. Right? Once your brain knows, okay, my right hand is my good hand, I'm just going to use that for everything. If I only need my left hand, then I'll use my left hand. The brain doesn't go around operating in inefficient ways. So if it's got one good tool, it'll use that tool as much as possible because it's a really good tool. So what does that mean for a person? Tell me what y'all see here. Scared. Right? I'd rather waste my day. Avoid. Terrified. Terrified. And then there's some, I want y'all to just notice, what is the emphasis of this post? Is the emphasis of the post cognitive or emotional? Right? What do I do? Problem solving, solution oriented. By the way, this is what's worked. Here's what's worked in the past. Analysis, 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 analysis. Right? I've even figured out, I'm not actually addicted to YouTube because I've analyzed it. I've analyzed it. What do I do? These videos are helpful, but there's no solution. I'm looking for an answer. So now I'm going to share something with you. This is going to be kind of a weird question, okay? If we give this person a solution that fixes the problem, what actually is that? What is this person looking for? If we give them a solution, what happens in their life? Okay, we're going to do a little bit of back and forth here. Cure all. Okay, so easy way. Okay, good. So if we give them a solution, what does that mean for them emotionally? When we give them a solution, what kind of emotions do they experience if it works? What are they looking for? Absolutely, right? So if we can fix this for them, what do they not have to experience anymore? Fear. And so even what they're asking for is an avoidance. This is subtle, okay? I don't even know if I can explain it. But they're looking for a solution. And if I give them a solution, I say, here's your solution. What does that mean for them? No more fear, no more terror. The solution is in and of itself looking for another way to avoid sitting with this emotional fear. Do y'all get that? Because if I can fix it, then I don't have to suffer. I don't have to be afraid anymore. And this person's entire life has been avoidance of fear, avoidance of fear. No fear at all costs. I can't even open the assignment because of the way it makes me feel. Please give me an answer so that I never have to feel that way again. Give me the answer so I never have to feel that way again. Anything to not feel that way again. Fix it for me. And if I say, oh yeah, here's the solution, it's fixed, the person's like, thank God, now I never have to feel fear. Even your solution is an avoidance. Do y'all get that? It's so damn subtle. It's woven throughout everything that they say. This is why it's so paralyzing. Make it go away, Dr. K. Teach me to make it go away. Okay? Now we're going to help them. There are solutions. But I just wanted to point that out. Okay? Another thing that I want to touch on that I think this, by the way, the person's analysis is fantastic. Okay? So the other thing is sometimes when people have this intelligence to avoidance thing, what they end up doing is using last minute panic to overcome other things. So I'm avoiding. And then as the deadline gets closer and closer and closer, you know, like pressure from deadlines, this is increasing. And as this increases, I'll end up acting. So this person has essentially like an antidote to the avoidance. So let's say this is my level of avoidance. If I want to do a task, and let's say the red line is pressure from the deadline, procrastinating. And once I hit this critical point, then I'll act. But as this person is noticing, so this is oftentimes what happens in people who are kind of gifted, intelligence leads to avoidance, is they have to use other kinds of negative emotions to fuel their action. So now it's a war between what if I fail versus I'm terrified to start. And all you're doing is like bruising yourself from one emotion or the other. And over time, since this is painful too, by the way, the mind starts to adapt. And how does it adapt? It learns how to avoid better. Moves this line. And over time, like that strategy doesn't work well. So what do we do about this? So we get gifted kids in our coaching program. Get intelligent kids in our coaching program. And they come to us and they say, give us the solutions, fix it for me. And the coach is like, eh. So this is what the coach asks. Coach asks, okay, so you want a solution for me, right? I don't know if I'm going to be able to give that to you. And then the client gets really upset and they're like, but I'm here for answers. That's what coaching is, right? You're supposed to give me answers. And the coach asks this question. This is part of our educational curriculum at this point. In the past, when you've struggled and someone has given you answers, has it helped? When people give you advice and tell you what to do, does it fix the problem? Client kind of scratches their head and says, well, no. Right? When people tell you what to do, it doesn't help. Well, that's just because no one has told me the right thing yet. So then we continued working with these people. It turns out that these people get better. They start to put their lives together, things like that. And then we got really confused because we were like, hold on a second. How is it possible that not giving this person an answer or a playbook or things like that, we're not telling them, okay, do this. We incorporate that stuff at some point, but not at the very beginning. How is it possible that people are actually getting better? And it turns out that what we're doing, we believe, so we're running a study on this, is that we're actually improving their EQ. So what does EQ mean? EQ is emotional quotient. So what does emotional quotient mean? This is our ability to become aware, tolerate, and not be victim to emotions. So when we think about someone who has a high EQ, their behavior can be independent of their emotional state. Do y'all get that? So this person's emotional state is determining their behavior. The fear of opening assignments and looking stupid controls their behavior. So this isn't a cognitive problem, it's an emotional problem. So the first thing to understand is that you've got to become more emotionally aware. It starts actually with awareness. Then it moves to tolerance, and then it moves to behavior. So these principles are also important for things like CBT, which we'll talk about a little bit later, right? So cognitive behavioral therapy can teach people how to do this, but this is not exclusively the province of cognitive behavioral therapy. So there are a bunch of articles in Harvard Business Review, for example, about emotional quotient and boosting emotional quotient for, executives and employees, and EQ training for management and all this kind of stuff. So emotions, we use it in psychotherapy, but emotions are a fundamental part of humanity, and they can be applied to a lot of different things. Management is where it's been getting the most traction recently. So essentially, the first thing that you've got to do is level up your emotions. Forget about solutions, forget about even avoiding. It's just going to be becoming aware of your emotions, tolerating your emotions, and then ultimately not being a victim to your emotions. Okay, so then the question is going to be okay, how do I do that? How do I develop awareness of emotions? And this is what's kind of challenging is you can use particular books, you can use particular exercises like meditation and stuff like that. But honestly, the most efficient way to become aware of your emotions is usually through dialogue. And y'all may have noticed this, it doesn't necessarily even have to be dialogue with a professional, right? So if I'm going through a breakup and I spend some time with my friends and we talk about it, I'm going to be more aware of what my emotions are, right? As they listen to me, as they empathize with me, more and more emotion comes out. And at the end of it, I feel lighter. If y'all caught our call-in stream yesterday, we had a really, really good example of that. Where it sounds kind of weird, but this very thing, so I want y'all to understand this. This person is avoiding the fear, right? What if I'm dumb? Avoid the reality that I'm dumb. Reality isn't that you're dumb. In fact, you have statistical evidence from a professional that you're not dumb. The reality isn't you're dumb. In fact, that's the falsehood, right? I don't know, duh. I mean, that's a little bit judgmental, but this is exactly what happens in the mind, is the mind believes that the insecurity is the reality. Even with contrary evidence, IQ tested by a professional, avoid the reality that I'm dumb. So what's going on here? This person is avoiding the negative emotion because the negative emotion is scary because they've never dealt with negative emotions in a healthy way. They've never experienced fear that leads them feeling lighter at the end. So when you have kids who's this kind of intelligence to avoidance kind of group, this is what they do with emotions. They've got a lot of intellect. An emotion shows up. They don't know how to handle it. They start panicking. I don't know how to draw panic, so I'm just going to write the word panic. And then what they do is they go to YouTube or video games. And what does that do? It shuts off the emotion, reduces the panic. There's no processing or tolerance of the emotion. It's all unhealthy coping mechanisms. So it's kind of bizarre, but you can work with emotions in a way that you can experience them, tolerate them, and actually feel better afterward. Right? Because this emotion makes us feel bad. And so then we shut it off. So all we know is that it makes us feel bad. All we have to do, if we process, tolerate, etc., let's say you go to therapy, and then you feel better after the negative emotion, then suddenly you don't need this anymore. Because fear is no longer something to be afraid of, because I can deal with it. In fact, I'm glad that I felt the fear because now I've worked through it and I feel less controlled by it. As you become less controlled by it, you're not going to be a victim to it. And so the hypothesis that we're testing in our coaching program, because this is sort of what we're leaning into, is that actually our methodologies are going to improve EQ. And we're wondering whether improvement of EQ is the mechanism through which we help gifted kids put their lives together. So that's the first thing. Stop avoiding your emotions. Okay? Next thing that you've got to do is develop an identity outside of gifted. Now, this is also something that's easier said than done. There's going to be another post in like 24 hours. How do I develop an identity outside of being a gifted kid? So that's where this is why we do the work in the way that we do it, right? So we have a lot of resources where we go into more detail about all of these things. So we have a lot of there's shunya meditation, for example, right? We talked about identity just a little while ago. We have a section of Dr. K's guide that talks about the ahamkar and the identity and the formation of identity and things like that. There's a lot of different samskaras and stuff like that we cover in the guide to ADHD and doing stuff, which, by the way, this is another thing that you can do. This is all in Dr. K's guide to ADHD and doing stuff. So what this person realized is that there are some practical things that you can do. Having deadlines, external accountability, starting right away. There's a lot of different stuff that you can kind of do environmentally to be more productive. So this is why we made a guide about it, because it's complicated. There are all kinds of things about environment, intent, resistance, things like organization, prioritization, right? So we can't go into all that stuff. That's why we have it elsewhere, right? So for some of the stuff like identity as well, you can look at our wiki and talk about healthy identity formation, but let's go back to that for a second. Because the first thing to understand about identity formation is this conundrum right here. Is that when you really believe that you're dumb, unfortunately, there are really only two ways to resolve this. The first is ask yourself, when did I start to feel dumb? Oh. Now, this is where you may say, oh, I started to feel dumb recently, right? Now, for example, when I open, I'm scared of my opening, it's a recent thing. Chances are no, it's not a recent thing. For most kids who fall into this intelligence versus avoidance trap, they actually started to feel dumb when they were told they were smart. I know it sounds bizarre. Because I am me. And the second someone applies a label to me that I don't really understand, I can start to be confused. Right? So if I want y'all to think about this, when does someone feel dumb? They don't feel dumb down here. They feel dumb right here, right at the very beginning. They start to feel stupid the second something becomes hard. So the truth of the matter is, chances are you started to feel a lack of confidence even as early as the first time someone told you oh, you're such a smart kid. And when they tell you that, you're going to be so amazing, you're going to accomplish so much when you grow up. When you're 6 and you're holy crap, I don't even know what that means. What are you expecting of me? How am I supposed to do that? I don't know if I can do that. Because here's the thing. We don't acknowledge that when we tell a kid they have potential, that's a huge burden. So when I have two blueprints, one is a palace and one is a shack, which one has more potential? Which one is harder to build? Whose life is actually easier? Who accomplishes what is expected of them faster? This is the huge thing that we don't understand when we tell kids that they're smart, is we're placing a huge expectation on them. And we don't tell them, this is the key thing, even if we're placing them a huge expectation. The trickiest thing is that we place the expectation on them that building the palace will be easy because you're smart. We never acknowledge that living up to your potential, the higher potential there is, the harder it is, and the more work there is. We never acknowledge this. And so then what the gifted kid does is they look at someone else building their shack and they say, oh, wow, a shack requires 4 pieces of wood and a little bit of a tin roof. And they get the same thing. They get 4 pieces of wood and a little bit of a tin roof, and they start building their palace. And guess what? When you have 4 pieces of wood and a little bit of a tin roof, that does not a palace make. In fact, what it convinces you of is that, oh, crap, these other kids are accomplishing this with so little, this is going nowhere near what I need to accomplish. That the effort, paradoxically, doesn't look like advancement at all. All the effort that you put in does is highlights how far you have to go and how impossible the task seems. Dig into this. Understand this. Second thing, experience. You got to do something. I don't care what it is. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be terrifying. Even this person, some things you're scared of, some things you're terrified of. Totally fine. You got to do something. And I know it sounds just kind of like saying, just do something. No, you have to be intentional. Just telling you to do it isn't enough. You have to understand this kind of thing. Leverage that intellect in your favor. Understand that this is the situation that you've got. And that you've got a real insecurity down there. And what you've got to do is test it. You have to test it, confront it. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it can be done effortlessly and it's not going to cause you suffering. In fact, there's going to be fear. Prepare for the fear. And you're going to feel pathetic about yourself because what I'm telling you to do is going to feel so small, right? Because this is the other challenge that we fall into, is that we feel like we're not capable. And so even the small task, which is so fearful, like just imagine if I can't even open my assignment, imagine how pathetic I feel. So even the smallest task doesn't seem easy. It seems impossible. And we say to ourselves, it should be easy. Why is it that an easy task is hard for me? That's right, because in reality, I am dumb. Do y'all see that? Because it's easy for other people and it's not easy for me, that must mean I'm stupid. So acknowledge that part of you that believes that. The truth of the matter is that it's not easy for you. The truth of the matter is that it's easy for other people because they leveled up their other stuff. It's easy for, and it may not even be easy for other people. They could be struggling too. Right? But this is like, okay, like I've leveled up my sorcery skill to 100 and now I'm up against a boss who is sorcery immune. And then there's someone over there who's got like level 20 sorcery and a level 20 axe and they're owning the boss and I'm struggling. There's not a value judgment that you are better or worse than the other person, but although that's how it appears. What we really have to understand is that this is the way we've been conditioned. This is the way that we've leveled up. And so even easy tasks can appear hard. The good news, though, is that as we experience, this belief can start to change. And the cool thing is, as this belief shrinks, this becomes easier. The fear will go with it. And you can start to do more, start to do more, start to do more, start to do more. But you have to acknowledge it and try to gain experience. Because the other thing about this is that, remember, what's paralyzing you is a theory constructed by your vast IQ. I don't mean that sarcastically. I know it sounds sarcastic, but. So gifted kids operate in the theoretical space because that's what they're good at. And so what we've got to do is start challenging our theory with actual data. And as you do this, you'll start to develop a healthy identity. Last thing to consider, get help. So, somewhere along the way, we decided that all of our problems need to be fixed by ourselves. Devastating. Because here's the problem. You know why it's hard for kids like this to get help, gifted kids to get help? It's hard for gifted kids to get help because, remember, here's who I think I am. Here's who I show the world up. This is what I show the world that I am. Here's my insecurities. Getting help involves taking someone else and bringing them down here. The very thing that you've worked so hard your entire life to convince people, you now have to yank away. Every moment that you've avoided doing something because it's going to make you look stupid, what does getting help mean? It means running in the opposite direction. It means going somewhere and being vulnerable and telling people, hey, by the way, this is all of the ways in which my life is an absolute mess and I really don't have it together. I'm afraid that I'm too stupid. I'm afraid that I'm incapable. I'm afraid, like, I don't even know if I can fix this anymore. It may be too late. I've fallen so far behind. Because remember, being a gifted kid is all about appearances, right? That's why we don't do the hard thing, because we don't want people to think we're stupid. So why is it hard to get help? It's because you have to run in the opposite direction from the way you've been going. But where is the idea that you have to fix this by yourself? That idea, obviously logically, like, get help, right? Just get help, bro or girl. Why is it so hard for us to digest? It's because we've practiced our entire life not showing people how much of a mess we are. And getting help means acknowledging that there's a mess. Getting help means showing people, hey, by the way, there's this gigantic mess. I'm so far behind. I don't know where to start. It runs contrary to everything that we've been doing. And that's absolutely what you need to do. So this is where, I think that, like, depending on what your situation is, you can do therapy. Definitely a good idea to get a clinical evaluation, because there could be other kinds of things mixed up in here, right? So part of your struggles may be something like major depressive disorder or something like ADHD or ADD, There could be like social anxiety or whatever. Like, there could be stuff that you should probably get evaluated, because solving this is hard enough without mental health issues, like mental illnesses, diagnosable illnesses. But I think this is also, well, like, when we sort of started our coaching program, this is the kind of stuff that we targeted, right? So we started to realize that our community struggles with particular problems that they don't teach you about when you're training to become a therapist. They'll touch on the fundamentals, but, like, I don't know how to say this. There's no, like, let me look. See what I can find here. So if you look at Kaplan and Sadek's concise textbook on clinical psychiatry, you ain't going to find how to help a gifted kid in here. If you look at the Handbook of General Hospital Psychiatry, this is a CL textbook, so that's another kind of thing. But you ain't going to find how to help a gifted kid in here. Does this mean that therapists can't help you? No. But we had this crazy idea, which is, can we actually help this subset of our community? What can we learn about them? And can we actually, like, help them in a targeted way? So get some kind of help. The key thing here is that it's not, putting your life together doesn't have to be a solo quest. It can actually be a co-op quest. Questions? Someone's joking. Concise handbook, $84 price tag. That's why it's expensive. What you pay for is succinctness. So everyone's asking, co-op with who? So I mean, this is where I kind of want to say almost anyone. So there's co-op on our Discord. There's co-op in Twitch chat. There's co-op with a therapist, co-op with a coach, co-op with friends, right? And this person even does that a little bit. right? They kind of talk about when they work in a study group or something like that, they do better. It's that kind of stuff. The key thing is that the first step to, partying up is in acknowledging that you've been trying to do it single player first. So you've got to step through that first, right? So that's where like who you do it with is kind of, it's kind of up to you. What feels comfortable to you? Yeah. Looking for one more need healer. What if you like to solve all of your own problems with your own mind? Some people can get out of depression or lack of self-confidence just by reprogramming their subconscious and using mantras and things like, etc. So, great question, young reefer. So a couple of things. One is, why do you like solving all of your own problems yourself? Right? So some people want to do it all by themselves. They like to do it all by themselves. But the real question is, why do you like it that way? Because for some people, a portion of that is going to be, I like it because I don't have to feel ashamed of myself if no one ever knows what I'm struggling with. See, here's the thing. We treat likes like they're sort of like facts. We don't recognize that likes of themselves, desires, what makes us comfortable, comes from somewhere. And we tend to adopt strategies that make us feel good. That's why we like things, because it makes us feel good. But why does it make us feel good? And sometimes the reason that we like to do everything ourselves is to avoid other people's perceptions if we ask for help, right? And that's not that uncommon. It's like no one likes to ask for help if it makes them look dumb. That's just humanity. And the tricky thing is that sometimes if we're not careful, we won't notice that about our mind. And we may think to ourselves, oh, like I'm going to use a mantra because I like using mantras, which is great. Mantras are fantastic. There isn't really great, I don't even know about great. There isn't even moderate evidence that particular mantras are particularly effective for mental illness or things like that. We can sort of operate on some of those assumptions, but the data really isn't there. We do know that mantra meditation is an effective form of meditation, just like other forms of meditation for mental illness. But, there's some concerns there about the research. A lot of that research comes out of the TM crowd. Very good researchers, but people have raised concerns about bias and things like that. So, I think their research is pretty good. So, Hummus Maximus, nice name, says, I have the exact same problem as this poster, and I've been to both a psychologist and psychiatrist, neither of which helped in any way through prolonged visits. So first of all, I'd say my condolences that has not been effective. I would also say don't give up on therapy or mental health support or like clinical support. And also, as a trained psychiatrist, there is a reason why I'm talking about this and I'm doing this here. The whole reason that I started Healthy Gamer is because I saw that there were shortcomings in the field of psychiatry and like mental illness treatment, clinical treatment. It doesn't mean that it's bad in any way. It's just the whole point is that the mental health challenges that we face are evolving beyond what psychiatry has traditionally dealt with. Is that a shortcoming of psychiatry? Sort of, but not really, right? Because that's not really a psychiatrist's job. When we think about the field of psychiatry, we think about it as a subset of medicine. And what is the practice of medicine? The practice of medicine is in, generally speaking, diagnosing and treating disease. But when it comes to the human mind, there's a whole spectrum of, what's disease versus discomfort versus, what's like optimizing performance. And I actually think that as a profession, we've actually done a pretty good job because a lot of therapists are very good at dealing with non-clinical things. The tricky thing is that that's not really what we're, You really have to go out of your way to get trained for that. That's probably the fair statement to make. More and more of clinical training is becoming focused and focused and focused about clinical things. We're moving away from the days of deep psychoanalytic training, right? That takes 5 additional years where we learn about a lot of stuff that's not clinical. But that's not what most therapists do. So psychiatry as a field is becoming more medicalized. And what I saw, the reason that we do this is because I realize there's a lot of stuff that we can learn about that psychiatrists or psychologists or therapists may not be trained to deal with. Now, can they help? I generally think that most therapists would be able to help with something like this. And I'd like to believe that Hummus Maximus's experience is like an outlier. Unfortunately, the other reason that we started this is because this is a story that we heard time and time and time again. Is that I went to a therapist and it wasn't enough. I wouldn't give up on it. What are your thoughts about the reports that depression is not as based on serotonin as we thought? I have not looked at whatever research people have been citing recently, but I'll share an interesting story with y'all. So in my personal statement for residency, this is when I was graduating medical school, I wrote about how depression is a serotonin imbalance. So I assumed that a depression is a serotonin imbalance. One of the people who interviewed me had a really interesting interview, fantastic person. It's kind of a scary interview in some ways, but thankfully it was good. But he was like, I noticed you wrote this line in your personal statement. Help me understand how you come to that conclusion. And I was like, well, I thought that's what it was. And he's like, actually, we don't know that. So this was in 2014, where I interviewed someone who basically told me that a line in my personal statement was factually incorrect, which you may normally think would be devastating for an interview, but we're a bunch of psychiatrists, or I wasn't then, wanted to be. And so we're able to really appreciate nuance, and it was really about the discussion and things like that, and I think I did pretty well in the interview. So I think a lot of psychiatrists know that we don't know that depression is a serotonin imbalance. That's what we've extrapolated. But I think that's the prevailing theory. Oh, Happy Nightmares is saying, I wouldn't be surprised at all if depression is more complicated than just being a serotonin thing. It's absolutely more complicated than just being a serotonin thing. We know that for sure. So Dark Cow Z is saying, it took me going to 4 psychiatrists to find one that would hear me and help me with my depression, but psychiatrists are only one step. There are 4 others I needed to do to get out of my 5 years of depression, but yeah, it felt like it wasn't working for the first year. Well, thank you very much for sharing that perspective. Unfortunately, it is a more common perspective than it should be. And I also want y'all to really take away from that message that when we say go see a mental health professional, that's not the end of it. You have to see the right mental health professional. And that can sometimes take a while, but it's absolutely worth it. Okay. So one other thing, since we're kind of on the topic, I just want to share this with you all real quick. So when we talk about getting help, right? So sometimes okay, so let's start with this. Sometimes the most efficient way to get help, to improve, is actually to just get help. And I just wanted to share with y'all, I know there's been a lot of negativity on the subreddit recently. I think it's good. I think it's healthy. But just wanted to share this with y'all. So coaching changed my life. Hey, all, I see a lot of people venting in a lot of posts, which is fine, and I get it. And at one point I did the same, but then anxiety got the better of me and I deleted it. However, I wanted to give a shout out to the Healthy Gamer coaching program and hopefully you guys a bit of hope for the future. A bit about me, I was a multi-college dropout, desperately trying to find solutions for what seemed to be a never-ending cycle of mental problems. Like many of you, I started watching Dr. K videos, and a lot of the problems he discussed really resonated with me. And by watching the online coaching videos, it made me feel better that other people shared my problems. I figured, heck, if I could pay for weed monthly, then I could pay for the coaching program. I was too scared to commit myself to an expensive therapist because A, was unsure if they would be a good fit, and B, I knew I had a lot of talking to do. So I signed up for the coaching program, and lo and behold, I did it biweekly for about a year. I did it for so long, I participated in one of their long-term coaching client surveys. I can give you a brief idea of what it entailed for me. Let me preface it by saying it is definitely not therapy. What it was for me was a safe and unbiased place I could just fucking vent for 50 minutes. Whether it was old problems or new, I could vent about life, and the questions my coach asked helped me dig deeper about life and myself. This eventually, after 1 year, led me to realize I needed actual professional therapy. I started professional therapy and initially went 2 weeks, and now I go about every 8. This all happened in a little under 2 years. TLDR, I went from being addicted to video games from 8 to 18 years old, lost in a spiral of substance abuse, weed, Nick, Addy, and could not find myself and was beginning to isolate from friends. Now I moved states and am dealing and processing my emotions more clearly. No longer am addicted to weed, Nick, or Adderall. I dropped all other medications as well, and I'm only on Lexapro. I'm getting social life back and regularly hang out with groups of friends now. I also now regularly attend school and work a full-time job, which I was doing neither of these things a year ago. Just wanted to quickly write this up, was meaning to after coaching ended. Don't really follow the community, but still see some posts. Shout out to Dr. K, shout out to Healthy Gamer, and as much as I wish I could give a name, I figure it's best not to. Shout out to my coach that dealt me with rantings during all those sessions. There is hope, y'all will be okay. Much love. I wanted to share that because I think the person really grasps a lot of what people don't understand about coaching. The first thing is that it's not therapy, and this person is like, it helped me a lot, and by the way, it's not therapy. We also want to put together a study about what percentage of coaching clients wind up in therapy. So actually one of the outcomes that we really look at, or not look at, but we want to look at is helping people get into mental health treatment, because there's sometimes barriers and stigma and things like that. So coaching and therapy are like two different things. And I think this person is a prime example of how to do both. That there are some things that you actually need a therapist for, but some of these things like building good habits, getting back into school, getting a job, socializing, right? And this person says they were venting, but I think they were doing a lot more than that, right? I'm pretty sure if we asked this person's coach, they would say that they're doing a lot more than venting. They're really starting to understand what holds them back. What is it within me that perpetuates the cycle? That's how we figure out how to break out of it. So I love this post because it touched on a lot of different things. So people do have a lot of concerns about the cost of therapy because therapy is expensive. And part of what we try to do is make our coaching affordable. Part of the other reason is because sometimes people will complain about the price, but they'll, like this person, will buy weed every week. Right? Some people really can't afford it, but I think a lot of people, we've seen this as well. A lot of people can afford it, they just choose not to. So I like this because, I think this client really exemplifies like what we see, what we try to accomplish, how we help, and also that sometimes we can't do it all and you need to see a therapist. And it's okay to need both. For what it's worth, I think this person's progress is probably in the minority. Like, I don't know many people who have done as much as this person does after a year of coaching and therapy. Like, that's a lot. They really put their life together, which is exactly why we're here. This is why we started the program. It's to do this. And also your mileage may vary. I think this person has really this is where it's important to understand that if you come into coaching, it's not going to fix you. It's going to help you fix yourself. And I think what this person is leaving out is all the work they put in. Because if you just come to coaching and you're like, coach me to success and sobriety, go. I don't want to give up weed. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I'm not going to move. I'm not going to do anything. Fix me. That doesn't work. The key thing, though, is that a lot of us have struggles and we don't know how to start. We don't know how to untangle things. We don't know how to get unstuck. And coaching can help with that. So if you sign up for coaching and you want to end up like this person, let me make it very clear that if you want to end up like this person, you're going to have to put in the work. Will the coach help you? 100%. But they can't do this for you. They can help you do it for yourself. And by the way, one of the primary goals of our coaching program is for people to no longer need it. It's to end it, equip you with the skills, help you put together your life. And it's really about self-understanding and developing your own skill set. It's not about developing dependency. Sometimes, though, it takes a while, right? It can take a year. For those of y'all, but I just want you to think about that, because like there are people in our community out there that are going to be smoking weed all the time, multiple time college dropout, no job, no friends, like struggling, and they think like, oh my God, I can never put my life together. This person did it in about 2 years. Sounds about right. If y'all have heard me talk about this before, I'll say like 6 to 18 months to really get started. You can start to see progress in 2 to 3 months. Like all of our outcome studies, what we presented at the American Psychiatric Association, for example, I think was an 8 or 12-week outcome study. So we started to see some changes, but it really takes, putting together your life takes years. But you can get started and make good progress and it starts to get a lot easier and feels a lot better pretty quickly. Sindar is saying I took about 4 years, but I'm in such a great place right now. Props to you, Sindar. It took me about 4 or 5 years as well. So Crady is asking, what do you think about medically induced akathisia? I've seen it a couple times, and that's really the kind of question that's more geared towards a professional. Like a professional that you have a medical relationship with. Okay. So let's see if we've got a couple more minutes. We're going to try to speed run this one. But we promised you all 3, so we're going to do 3. Macho 212 is asking, how am I doing? I'm doing okay, but I'm right at the point in the stream where I realize that I'm already 20 minutes late. And now I'm going to have to choose between depression or meditation. So I'm going to pick depression. We're going to do the depression post. And so I'm already dreading having to apologize for skipping meditation again. That's how I'm doing. But I think it's important. It's such a good question. And so many people are talking about depression and serotonin and stuff, so I feel like we got to talk about it. Okay. Let's get oriented and set up. All right. So let's take a look at this. Does depression cause pessimistic thoughts, or do pessimistic thoughts cause depression? This sounds a bit like the chicken or the egg. I'm trying to figure out, but I want to hear what you have to say. The answer might be obvious to someone who knows more about it, or both scenarios may exist. I don't know. I'm thinking of someone that doesn't have any serious trauma, but still develops something that causes that person to be sad. This is a great question. I love this question because this is the kind of thing that I think we should teach everybody. It's not about clinical stuff. It's not about diagnosis or treatment or things like that. But what is the fundamental relationship between having thoughts and whether they cause depression. So does thinking pessimistically make me depressed? Or are my pessimistic thoughts a source of the depression? Because if we're struggling with feeling sad, it's like really important to understand, right? Because like if you're feeling sad, is this something that is a distortion of my mind that is being created out of my depression? Because if that's the case, that means that I don't trust my sad thoughts. Or do my sad thoughts come first? And if they come first, do they trigger my depression? So it's not that I shouldn't trust my thought, it's that there may be something that I need to do to prevent my pessimistic thoughts from making me depressed. Because the tricky thing is that, like, you don't know what to believe, right? Like, are the thoughts real and then, like, I'm just not handling them properly, which is why I'm getting depressed? Or are the thoughts a creation of this cognitive distortion? Because it leads to, like, two very different things. Like, do I need to be managing my thoughts better? Like, do I need to fix the way that I deal with my thoughts so that they don't make me depressed? Or are they coming from such a toxic place that I need to, like, learn how to step away from the whole thing entirely? So it's a great question. And it's confusing for people because we don't really explain this stuff. So let's understand a couple of things. Okay? There's a lot of detail about some of the stuff we're going to talk about today in Dr. K's Guide to Depression, but we're going to go over a couple of core things. So this is what we know clinically. Sometimes we have circumstances. Circumstances make us feel sad. We have bad thoughts, pessimistic. And then what can happen is we can feel depressed. So let's just call this a depressive episode. So we're talking about clinically here, okay? So an episode of major depressive disorder. This isn't feeling depressed. Now, how do we know that this is a depressive episode? How do we know that this is a clinical thing as opposed to an appropriate response to our circumstances? Well, there's something really interesting about depressive episodes. If circumstances improve or even resolve, if these are the cause of the sad thoughts, what this means is that sad thoughts should go away. So what we tend to find in a depressive episode is that even if circumstances resolve, and what was making you sad in the first place does not make you sad anymore, the depressive thoughts remain. Now, this isn't for all people, but we do know that circumstances can trigger depressive episodes. So psychosocial stressors, setbacks in life, sources of stress, things like that can trigger a depressive episode. But the interesting thing about the depressive episode is once you get to this point, it has a life of its own. And even if the circumstances resolve, the sadness remains, or the impairment in function remains. Okay? This is the case of a clinical depression. Now, once again, an oversimplification, but this is one of the hallmarks of it, right? So, like, how do you know if someone is clinically depressed? One of the key things that I look for as a clinician is seeing, are they depressed despite their circumstances, or are they depressed because of their circumstances? And when I see depression despite your circumstances, i.e., you're in a good relationship, your job is going well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it's more likely to be a clinical illness. Now, let's dive in a little bit further. So let's try to understand, if the circumstances are fixed, why does this continue? And this is where we can expand a little bit beyond the scope of clinical depression. We can still lean on it. We're going to take some important learnings away from it, but we're going to start to understand a little bit more in general about how the mind works. So our mind has a very, very important part, or our brain has something called the default mode network. Also, a whole video about this in Dr. K's Guide. The default mode network is what allows us to self-reflect. Think about ourselves. And essentially form an identity. So I'll tell you all why this is really important. So let's say I go fruit picking and I climb up into a tree and I fall and I hurt myself. And then let's say I go fruit picking again and I climb and I fall and I hurt myself. And then I'm walking, let's say I'm trying to get into a boat and I fall and I hurt myself and I fall into the water. At some point, there are all of these individual experiences which my mind will then reflect on and will come to a meta-level conclusion. I'm clumsy. Once I have this sense of identity from these different experiences, this then informs the way that I move forward. So if someone asks me, hey, Alok, do you want to come help me replace shingles on the roof? I've never replaced shingles on the roof. I don't really know. Like, I've never had a negative experience with that. But once the default mode network tells me that I'm clumsy, I can use that simplification of identity to inform what I should do and what I shouldn't do. So I'm going to say no because I'm clumsy. Do y'all see that? So developing an identity that is a simplified version of yourself makes it easy on the mind because you don't, it's a heuristic. It aids in processing information and making decisions. So this is what happens. I'm not talking about clinical depression, but now we're going to talk just about generally when people feel sad and they feel quote unquote depressed, whether it's clinical or non-clinical. So similar thing happens. So I've got a particular thought that's negative. Let's say sad thought, fearful thought, bad outcome, and then what happens is I form an identity. And in clinical depression, what we call this is negative self-attitude. So it's just some kind of attitude towards the self that's negative in nature. So either I'm hopeless, or I think I'm incompetent, or like I'm not good at something, or other people are better than me, or something, whatever. So we form some kind of negative identity. Now here's what people need to understand about identity. So once we have, and now we're going to lean on yoga a little bit. So once we have an identity, or ego / ahamkar, what this actually does is creates a filter for experiences. So let's say that I think I'm clumsy. If I'm walking down the street, someone trips and falls, and they drop their child, and I catch their child, right? So I have a very positive experience where clearly I'm not clumsy. I'm like reflexive. I'm like, I caught something. I saved someone's, I helped this kid not fall over, caught them. Like, this is a good thing that runs contrary to my identity. The tricky thing about an identity is that that bounces off. So I don't start thinking, oh, like, look at me, I'm actually quite dexterous. I'm still clumsy. But if I trip and fall, that sinks right in. And I let that thought into my mind. So once we have an identity, and this is why in cognitive behavioral therapy, what we'll do is we'll deal with cognitive distortions and biases. And what we begin to see in cognitive behavioral therapy is that like this process is very active, where some thoughts are being bounced out, depending on what I believe, and some thoughts are being let in. Does that make sense? Now, this is really, really tricky, because what our mind is actually doing is discarding a lot of stuff. So I'm going to give you all a good example of this. So there was recently a study on imposter syndrome. And one of the things that's really interesting about imposter syndrome is that when you have imposter syndrome, you reject certain kinds of feedback, which reinforces your imposter syndrome. So specifically what happens in imposter syndrome is that when you accomplish something, when you have an accomplishment, and someone says, good job, you reject it. But anytime there's a criticism, you'll let it in. Same person. We've even done research into what is the nature of this rejection. And what we tend to find in people who have imposter syndrome is that they attribute other people's successes to their effort. But your successes are due to things like luck. Your mind manipulates the information differently. So if like your boss says, hey, great job to you for doing such an awesome job this week with handling that difficult client, you're like, oh, I just got lucky. Or like the client actually wasn't that bad, or like it turned out that everything was okay, and like you basically knock away the praise. And if your boss says the same thing to someone else the next week, they're like, hey, great job handling that really tough client. The way that your mind handles that if you have imposter syndrome is you're like, wow, that person is like really great at handling like, difficult customers. And if you get negative feedback, that's gonna, you're gonna let that in. And sorry, this is not right, this identity. The negative feedback you're gonna let in. And so then what that does is now we've changed what influences our identity because we're rejecting some things. Right? And so our identity will be more and more reinforced. Negative identity. The other thing to keep in mind is that our identity both influences the thoughts that come into our head and also produces thoughts. It creates thoughts. These thoughts and experiences can then go back and create additional filters. So do your thoughts make you depressed, or does your depression make your thoughts? It turns out that we're talking kind of non-clinically here for a second. The answer is a little bit of both. So what we also know is the quickest treatment for clinical depression, at least that, actually maybe ECT qualifies too. So the top treatments for depression in terms of speed, not efficacy, is actually ketamine. And the interesting thing about the initial studies on ketamine is that they show that if you start like antidepressant medication, it'll take a couple weeks for it to work. But people will notice like hours after ketamine, some people, there's more research that needs to be done. I suspect that it's not quite as great as some of the initial studies show, but that people sometimes experience relief of depression within hours of a ketamine treatment. And guess what ketamine does? Shuts off the default mode network. It's a dissociative agent, right? So ketamine was originally used as anesthesia so that people could tolerate procedures because it unplugs you from yourself. We also have some theories that things like meditation and psychedelics and some of these novel treatments for depression will also work on our sense of identity. So they'll help us feel connected to the rest of the world. So like my small identity doesn't feel, I'm me and I don't feel connected to anyone else. And like some of these psychedelic agents appear to affect through that mechanism. I'm not recommending the use of psychedelics for the record. Right, this is just the research that's being done. We need to learn more about it. But it comes down to this identity. Meditation also appears to work by reducing the activity of the default mode network. So do your thoughts create your depression, or do your depression create your thoughts? It turns out that the answer is a little bit of both. I think the key thing is that they're mediated through the sense of identity, at least in depression. At least with the way we're simplifying it right now. There's more to it, right? We're not talking about serotonin or other networks or other aspects of depression, physiologic aspects of depression. inflammatory aspects of depression, etc. So, a couple of things to keep in mind if this feels like it applies to you. I don't know that this person was asking for what do I do about it, but I'm just going to share with you all some thoughts about how to make this applicable. So the first thing is, if you're in this situation, to think a little bit about your identity and where it comes from. So what we tend to find when we do this is that our identity oftentimes is pieced together from traumatic experiences that have unprocessed emotions and lead to erroneous conclusions about ourselves. So I'll give you all just an example from my own life. So when I was young, when I started school, I was about 1 year younger than most of my classmates. And so what I found was that I sucked at basketball. I sucked at baseball. I sucked at football. So I concluded I'm not athletic. Now, it turns out that the reason that, probably the biggest reason that I sucked at all three of these things is because I was a 5-year-old competing against 6-year-olds. Or I was a 4-year-old competing against 5-year-olds. The thing is, this sense of identity stuck with me. And these experiences aren't wrong. It's just these experiences, every time I got picked last for the basketball team, it emotionally hurt. I hated PE. I knew I was going to get picked last all the time. Since I was nervous and getting picked last, I would screw up sometimes, right? Because I don't know how to play, and the kids would make fun of me. That would hurt too. Sometimes that even resulted in bullying. I was like 4 or 5 at the time, so I had no idea how to process emotions, so it just developed into an identity. So as I wanted to develop confidence of myself, and as I'm sure you all can understand that even today, I sort of still experience this from time to time, where this will create thoughts in my head. So people will ask me, hey, Alok, do you want to go do this? And I'll say no, because I'm not athletic. So how do you deal with that? You start by sort of working on this by understanding, where does it come from? Where did I start to believe this about myself? The second thing to do, and then as you ask that, hopefully you can reinterpret it, right? And develop a better understanding that resolves this emotional hurt and starts to change your identity. Second thing is really important. Take a look at your filter. What do you reject? Subtle. Sometimes it's I'd almost say it's almost impossible to figure out on your own. That's not true, but it's just so much more effective. It's hard to see your own cognitive biases. This is another reason why it's good to work with someone, right? So when I work with my clients, I'm able to spot their cognitive biases way faster than they are. And if y'all have watched call-in streams or interviews that you do, you will notice the cognitive bias. You don't have to be trained. You will notice the cognitive bias in someone way before they do. So it's hard to do, but really pay attention to your filter. And what do you reject and what do you accept? And then ask yourself, if I filter these, what impact does this filter, oh my God, this is so terrible, have on my identity? Because here's the thing. If you have imposter syndrome and you're rejecting your own successes and appreciating other people's and letting the criticism in, holy crap. No wonder you feel like an imposter. Because all the evidence that you're not an imposter, that you're actually a decent person, has been ruled inadmissible. So you're not going to let it in. Once you have awareness of that, so this is actually, there's research on this, that if you have someone who's got imposter syndrome, what you can actually do is have them reframe from this to this. And have them notice, hey, anytime you get praise, pay attention. And notice, does your mind say, oh, this is just because I got lucky? Notice you rejecting it. And then ask yourself, why do I think that I got lucky, but I'm willing to attribute? No, actually, like, and there's even like an exercise that you can do as an imposter where you can like sit down and like ask yourself, when you get a good achievement at work, ask yourself, like really think through, okay, what are the things that I did do to deserve this? I'm not saying at the end of the day that I deserved it or didn't get lucky, but what was my contribution? Right? You can, well, I showed up every day. I did actually work really hard. It was very challenging. Like I asked for advice. These are the things that I did do. And when you do that kind of cognitive reframe, it starts to melt away at the imposter syndrome. Another thing to consider, since we are talking about a depression, is getting a clinical evaluation. Right? So like you can do all this kind of stuff, but like, remember, we sort of started talking about this, so we're kind of like, some of this stuff could be like a clinical illness, and some of this is just the way that our mind works. How do you know? Which is what the natural question is, and that's where like you don't know, right? So there are trained professionals who know how to tell the difference, and you should go see one. The last thing to consider is unplugging from your identity. Right? So we know that, for example, ketamine, I'm not suggesting use ketamine, that should be used in a licensed, prescribed way. But essentially what we know is that if you're stuck in this thought loop where you have a particular identity that's creating thoughts, what we know is from various kinds of research, you can do things like meditate or even some pharmacologic agents that are prescribed that can help you unplug from your identity. Last thing that we already touched on a little bit today is that another way from unplugging from your identity is actually spending time with yourself, with nature, and away from other people. Because remember, a lot of your identity is what you project, right? Especially for something like imposter syndrome. Because who you are and who other people think you are is like two different things. And so to spend time with yourself, sometimes literally what you have to do is spend time away from other people. And like, I don't know how to say this, but like, I don't know that if you're a castaway on a desert island and you're living by yourself for 20 years, I don't think it's possible to have imposter syndrome. There's no other people to judge you. So you can't be an imposter. Right? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's some castaway who tells me, oh yeah, actually I had the worst imposter syndrome of my life. What we tend to find is that spending time with nature, like literally just going for a walk or hiking or camping, like helps with unplugging from this identity that we construct. And keep in mind that this identity we construct is getting worse through things like social media. Because now, like, does a lot of Reddit karma make me a good person? Do a lot of likes on my tweet make me a good person? We're starting to equate social media approval with intrinsic value of a human being. And so unplugging from that is really, really important. So spend time with yourself. Like, caution with socials. So it's a good question. What comes first? The sad thoughts or the depression? A really fundamental question, right? Is it my negative thoughts that are making me depressed? Or is my depression making the negative thoughts? It may seem like a little bit of a chicken or the egg, but it's actually really important because how we deal with it is very different. So it's important. Because if my negative thoughts are making me depressed, I need to be a little bit more careful about not letting them get out of control. or I need to address them. But if my thoughts are from a state of mind that is distorted cognitively, then like I don't need to treat them that seriously, right? Because it's all cognitive distortion anyway. So in order to understand that, chances are there's a little bit of both, right? But as we get into the nuance of it and as we get into detail, we start to see that actually we do have some answers. So in the case of a clinical depression, originally it can be triggered by a thought that's appropriate to your circumstances, but once it gets triggered, it has a life of its own and can persist even when the circumstance that originally made you depressed is completely gone. In a more general sense, if we understand how the mind works, we've got to be super careful. Because when we have sad thoughts, sometimes they can form into or we have negative experiences and sad thoughts, they can form into an identity. I will be alone forever. I will never find love. I'm not athletic. And the tricky thing is once we develop that identity, the identity comes with a filter. The problem with the filter is that as we start filtering thoughts that are contrary to our identity, that's when we really get into trouble. Because it turns out that you are lovable. You just reject that thought. And you let the thoughts that reinforce the idea that you're unlovable. Did I say lovable or unlovable? You reject the evidence that you are lovable in favor of the evidence that you are not lovable. And once that happens, it just reinforces the identity, strengthens the filter, et cetera, et cetera. It's a good question. And hopefully today we've dived into a little bit about how that works and to give you all some tools to play with. At the end of the day, you want to be a little bit careful about how your identity formed in the first place and be a little bit critical of that. Second thing that you need to do is understand how your filter works. What's the information that you reject and what's the information that you let in? You can start to do some kind of cognitive reframes, things like that. If we're really talking about issues of depression, another thing that you should really do is get a clinical evaluation, right? Because is this like more of the yogic, like this is how my mind works, or do I actually have depression? Like that's something for a clinician to determine. The last thing is spend more time with yourself and spend less time with the person that you pretend to be. That's a healthy way to build your identity. All right. You know, one thing, who are you rating today, y'all? I gots to go. Is there an ETA soonish? I don't know. I don't think so. We try not to give ETAs. They just lock us in. I mean, so what I can say is that we're done filming. So it's in post-production. Zane, Nagmi, Smash Bros, Macy J. Rainbow Six or Smash Bros? Prime. Software and game development. Let's do that. This looks cool. Let's do software and game development. Take care, y'all. We're going to do the Primogen. Start raid. Boom. Okay. We'll see y'all hopefully tomorrow. We're trying to stream, we had just this bonus stream this week or something. I think we're trying to stream 4 days this week. Take care, everybody. Looks like Primogen is doing software and game development, which is that's hype, dude. So take care, everybody. We'll see y'all on, Oh, GG.